So why don't we begin?
Yeah.
So I'm not entirely sure what the acoustics will be like, although they sound pretty good. But as I always tell my students, raise your hand if you can't hear any of us, and we'll speak. Oh, thank you. Then we'll speak louder. So thank you all for coming to remember our mom, Mary. We'll begin with Luis.
On behalf of my family, thank you everyone for coming this morning. It's such a wonderful turnout, and it's so great to see friends, old and new, that span the legacy and the spectrum of my mother's life. It's really heartening. It's really wonderful to have received so many notes of condolences and gratitude from so many of you. We thank you. We thank you most graciously for that. This morning, we have a series of family members that will come up and discuss different parts of my mom's life. So Mary Zervigon had a philanthropic and volunteer activist side of her. She had a political activist side of her. And of course, she was a mom, a grandma, and now a great grandma. So we'll come up and give you a little flavor on that. That's just the many varied person that she is. I'll start by talking a little bit about her philanthropy and her volunteer work. She was quiet in a lot of things she did, including her philanthropy and her volunteer work. She's known, I think, well for having been a trustee of two family foundations for decades, the Rosemary Foundation, which was founded by her grandparents, A.B. and L.O.S. Freeman, and the Keller Family Foundation, which was founded by her parents, Rosa and Charles Keller Jr. And she was the president of the Keller Family Foundation since 1998, so for a long, long time. But she really valued her work on the foundation, the family foundation boards, but she didn't take the work lightly. She didn't just show up to meetings. She engaged with grant applicants and even local nonprofits and charities who perhaps were trying to get organized and grow enough to qualify to even make an application to the foundation. She told a story once that she visited a pastor and his wife who ran a local nonprofit helping youth in their neighborhood to help them sort of put it all together and make an application. And she sat down with them in their kitchen and asked for their financial statements. And the pastor reached up on the shelf and pulled down a shoebox filled with receipts for the kids' snacks and t-shirts. And she said, you know, you're not quite there yet, so let me help you with that. So she worked with them over some time, but that's how engaged she was at the ground level in the street. And I think that work was valued by a lot of people that she touched. Volunteerism, her volunteer work was similarly quiet, but down in the weeds and helping people directly. She, of course, sat on numerous boards throughout her life, organizations large like Loyola University and Xavier University, and longstanding organizations like the Bureau of Governmental Research. She was very active on all those types of agencies, but she also volunteered and served on the boards of smaller agencies. She was a big supporter of some that are just run by volunteers, like PFLAG, a scholarship organization run entirely by volunteers that she was a big supporter of. So she didn't think about just large agencies. She was really down there helping lots of different people. And of course, that part of her character was strongly influenced by her parents and her grandparents and her family. And that was the legacy that she lived. It was a central part of her character and a large part of how she thought about every day of her life, which was really kind of neat. And actually, that aspect of her volunteerism and philanthropy spilled over in how she approached her political activism, which my brother Carlos will talk about in just a moment. So generally speaking, to wrap up, you know, she was very well known for her frankness, which she got from her father, who was a colonel in the Army, her knitting and such things. But she also had a towering intellect that lots of people recognized. And as a teenager, I can tell you, it would make my head spin every so often. If you asked a simple question, you would never get a simple answer. That was just the type of thoughtfulness she had and things. She wanted us to think for ourselves. And when she approached the professionals that worked at nonprofits in her philanthropic and volunteer life, she approached them with respect. She approached them with humility, and she approached them with a touch of Southern charm. And I think that really endeared her to a lot of people in the community. And I think it was the secret to her success in having such strong positive influence throughout our community. And it's a really lovely legacy, I think, for her children and her family and the rest of us to try to emulate. Well, thank you so much for coming. I appreciate that. And we'll move on to the next speaker.
So I want to talk about how Mom raised us. In the late afternoon of a late August day of 1983, I arrived at Boston's Logan Airport on a ticket that I had bought for myself. I hailed a taxi cab and I took it to the university where I would spend my first year of undergraduate education. And I noticed something. Although I was alone and I'd done everything on my own, all the other students had huge gaggles of family with them. They had come in cars packed with luggage. Grandparents were with them. Pets were with them. And I thought, oh, I think I've been raised differently somehow. So the key was that Mom wanted us to be self-sufficient and independent thinkers, just as she was. And so that kind of self-sufficiency included, among more granular things, are doing our own errands. I'm sorry, our own chores. So we had a chart for the week on the fridge with our names and the tasks we were responsible for completing that week. The cat was on that list. And the cat's chores included, in succession, sleep, eat, sleep, eat, sleep, eat. So that was Mom's making of the charts. We did our own cooking. We did our own laundry. And the remarkable thing that Carlos reminded me of the other day is that when our private school friends would come over, they would say, "Oh my God, I can't believe your mom makes you do these chores." But when our public school kids, friends came over, they said, "Oh my God, I can't believe your mom is also on the list. And she also participates." So I think this all more or less began, again, in part because of how she was raised, but also because when she went to City Hall to work for the mayor, she realized what was really working for her was self-sufficiency, a lot of her own initiative, things that she wanted us to have. And so that was when these lessons really kicked into overdrive. We would have really great discussions / arguments with her. And she would sometimes say, I raised you to be headstrong and independent. Maybe that was a mistake. So these are the kinds of things that maybe mark the Mary that all of you know. So sometimes, though, she would gently admonish us or give us advice, but in a way that was never really too imposing. Are you sure that's a good idea? Have you thought that through? Have you given that a try yet? Do you trust that friend who suggested it to you? And is she or he truly a friend? So Mom, though, was, as we all know, super sober in her outlook, very predictable. You always knew where she stood, and she offered us kids and grandkids a kind of rock of stability. And I think in addition to the love she gave us, that was one of the greatest contributions she offered. So I'll miss that. But I think part of this is, like you can maybe already see, she treated us as adults, not as kids, even when we truly were kids. So that meant we had really good, intellectually rigorous conversations with her. She valued our opinion and helped gently form it when she felt it would be valuable, She wanted us to be mature thinkers from an early age. And among other things, she talked to us about taxes, just like her parents talked with her about taxes, how they're structured, how they work. She loved to read. She almost never stopped reading. She wanted to inspire that in us as well. I remember when she would visit me, if I had to step out to go to the bathroom, when I came back, she was reading a book. It was always that way. So in addition, Mom was really funny. And I think that's something that we all remember from Mom. So it's something our friends like our age really enjoyed. A colleague of mine in California, she was the chair of my department where I first taught. Mom came for a visit. We were having dinner at her house, and she pulled me aside in the kitchen. And she said, "Oh my God, I love your mom." So this is like something I'll remember in terms of that affection she endeared in people. But the humor, Mom avoided euphemism. For example, she was going to come for a visit. Her dog Daisy needed to be tested to see if she could be in the kennel, like with the other dogs. So Mom wrote me a message with nothing else but saying, "Daisy is passed." And that wasn't her phrasing at all. I thought, that doesn't sound right. She meant Daisy had passed the test. But I imagined this dog lying on the floor, motionless. She also benefited from very straightforward reasoning. Like, for example, on masochism, she said, "It's hard to understand. I don't like pain. It hurts." Or there was a very ugly condominium building that went up in the 1970s. And Mom said, "I propose an ad campaign, and it'll say, 'Live here,' so you don't have to look at it." And but in addition to the humor, Mom was also super efficient in the way she conducted meetings, foundation meetings or otherwise. And a number of you have already talked with us about this. And that was really, really great. They never got bogged down, at least in the Family Foundation meetings. It could often be, let's save that for later. Let's move on. I wish my faculty meetings worked the same way. And even on like calls, personal calls, there was a point at which Mom would say, not, "Okay, goodbye." She would say, "I think I've run out of things to say." Just super straightforward. And among other things, Mom, I said she was funny, she avoided euphemism, and she was super realistic about death. So when we asked her, "What should we do today?" she said, "I don't care, I won't be there." So we've done it on our own. But that said, Mom also mourned very deeply. Jose, my husband Jose, reminded me, not a day went past when she didn't talk about Caroline, her sister, and Charles, her brother. She missed Betty Wisdom almost just as much. Talked about her maybe every other day. And the list goes on. And now all of us will miss her just as much. So thank you. Now I bring my brother Carlos up.
So I've been given the difficult task of trying to explain in some of our mom's public and political life succinctly, which is difficult because there's just so much of it that was there. And we get to brag on our mom a little bit, I think, right now. So piggybacking on what my brothers were talking about, they talked about some things I was going to talk about and took care of it for me. You know, if you all knew Rosa Keller and Chuck Keller, if you knew those two, then you know that our mother was very much a combination of those two. Our grandmother was a steel magnolia. Nothing would stop her. She'd get it done if it needed to be done, and she'd have a smile on her face the whole time doing it. Our grandfather was a man of few words, but when he spoke, then you ought to be listening. And our mom was the same way. So the way she approached her work in the public life was also like that. And it's interesting that she was a woman of her generation. She got married at age 20. She dropped out of college in order to get married, start having the kids. And then 11 years later, she found herself divorced. And, you know, she was just militantly independent as a woman. she was not going to tie herself down like that ever again. She was going to do it her way, and she was going to teach us to do the same. So again, in her political life, you'd see it was very much the same way. It's interesting that she kept the name Zervigon. You might ask, why'd she keep the name Zervigon? And I would talk to her about this. She said there was maybe 4 reasons. One, she had already developed a reputation by the name, and she wanted to keep it for that reason. It was the name of her children, and she thought that was important. Also, it did allow her to work a little less under the shadow of her mother, who had been such an activist, and it gave her a little more breathing room in that regard. And also, she liked the Zervigon family. She liked the Zervigons. So the thing that our family has had in common, both Keller and Zervigon, for us was their activism, their civil rights work, the fact that on both sides, they were going to take risks and they were going to do what they thought was right. And that was it. So it was a good combination. And that's, her foundation. So at one point, then she'd been working on the Edward Edwards campaign, the Moon Landry campaign. Then she was back home with the 5 of us, single mother. And I remember she asked us, how do you feel about my going to work full time? And I remember saying, Mom, you need to get to work and you need to do what you need to do for yourself. But she asked us, and then she went to Moon. The campaign had just concluded, and Moon tells a story, and my mom tells a story, where he went to her and said, she went to him and said, Moon, I'm looking for a job. I'd like to work in the administration. He said, how many words do you type a minute? She said, I don't type. She said that determined her fate for the rest of her career, that she could not type. So, well, what degree do you have? I don't have a degree. Well, the garage is kind of full. I can't offer you a parking space. Well, I don't drive. She had epilepsy. She couldn't drive. We had to get ourselves where we were going to go. I said, all right, then you're hired. She was the assistant to Moon's secretary. So you had the mayor's office, his secretary, then Mom's desk. What that meant was that as they, as far as not on the screen, as the mayor or people would be leaving the office, Mom's right there. They could say, hand it to Mary, get her to work on this, get her to work on that. And she proved herself. And over time, she became an executive assistant to the mayor. She was in her 30s. She was the first female ever to hold that position. And she earned everyone's enormous respect in her work in that way. So in that capacity, one of her main jobs was representing a very unpopular organization in Baton Rouge known as the City of New Orleans. So when you get there, you always start with a losing hand. That's just the way it works, And but it was part of a group of real determined, hardworking people. They were on a mission. At the time, I remember as a kid, government was so exciting. It was so kind of romantic and exciting, and it was a team of people who wanted the community to be better, who served with integrity, who exercised good government, and it was an enormously interesting time, both in Baton Rouge and in New Orleans. So then the Constitutional Convention was formed. Edward Edwards picked her to be a delegate, and she would have to get on the bus to go to Baton Rouge. Sometimes she would take us with her, then maybe Felicia Kahn or somebody would give us a ride back home. And so we got to see our mom in action, and the way in which she worked with what was almost entirely an organization of men. They were always about twice her height. And so you'd always see her looking up at them and talking to them. And in terms of what we talk about how she approached them, and same way when she lobbied the legislature, she was always extremely unassuming. She was always extremely gracious, but she was always very prepared, very determined, very strong-headed. And I got the idea as a kid that I could see these guys were kind of afraid of her. They were. And what I mean by that, it's not that she wasn't unkind or gracious, but it's just that if they wanted to get something done and she was going to be sent to oppose it, they'd better be ready, or she was going to have their lunch. They knew when she came in the room, it was time to be serious. And so she also knew that, like she had said, in government, you got to make decisions. Therefore, you are going to make some people unhappy. Therefore, you're going to make enemies. Just the nature of the job, by accident. Therefore, you better be making friends intentionally at all times. In the legislature, that was kind of her go-to. So she discovered where the rural caucus was having their meetings at breakfast. They'd go have breakfast. It'd be very casual. And I guess being the little short, unassuming redhead, she would just say, hey, guys, can I join you, for breakfast? And they didn't send her away. And she ended up making good relationships with them, learning what they need, then telling them what the city needs. And then she could get some things done in that way. And that was her style. It was collaborative, but also it could be combative if it had to be, right? So with her reputation, it's funny, I kept on seeing people saying how she was so direct, like her father. What I would like to point out is that you will never hear anybody say Mary Zervigon was rude. You will never hear that, because when she was direct, it was time for it to be said. Or maybe people say, oh, Mary Zervigon, she schooled me on that one. Or I guess I had that coming. But usually it was, the situation where, for example, well, actually, before that, I have a story to share with y'all. There's a funny story Moon tells. He's told it several times. Our mother was very much interested in property tax reform. Very arcane, very complicated stuff, very important stuff. And there was a time that was actually a big issue. So Moon put her on property tax reform. Now, remember at that time, the assessors were the kingmakers in this area and in the city. They were the big bosses. So you're taking on the kingmakers when you talk about property tax reform. And they had some meeting where Mom was supposed to make a presentation. And then later, Moon and Lawrence Sahardi, the big kingmaker of Jefferson Parish, were in an elevator. And he said that Lawrence was quiet for a minute. Then he looked at Moon and said, damn it, Moon, that little redhead of yours is going to unelect us all. Because she was effective, Another time, as far as that atmosphere, once Elizabeth and I were living at our mother's between houses when she was working for Sydney, running the legislative office for Sidney Bartholomew. And Elizabeth and I were checking the messages on the old-fashioned answering machine. And the phone answered, and there was just all this noise in the background. You could hear a heated discussion, lots of things being said. There's some passion in the room. And then it ended with, Mary, call us, click. And we're like, Mom, what was that? So a bunch of bills got filed we're not happy with. We're gonna have to deal with that. And it was probably a young Troy Carter in that office calling, getting your teeth cut with the job. But usually the way this kind of thing worked was with my mom's known frankness. She was known for knitting at meetings, right? A lot of people how she'd be sitting there knitting, counting her stitches, and people talk about that a lot. And when I asked my mom about that, she says, well, one, it helped her think. It's like doodling. It allowed her to concentrate. She could be off on the side knitting. She also was aware that it was disarming for people, unassuming Mary just sitting there to the side, don't worry about Mary. And then she could jump in and say, look, this is what y'all are missing. This is the way it's going to work. And everybody, yep, Mary's right. The last reason is that the kids needed sweaters. The kids needed blankets. The kids needed hats. Because at all times, as a single working mother, she was our mother out there at all times. And think about like Anita, our Aunt Anita was remembering how at the old New Orleans Coalition meetings, she'd be sitting there nursing, it must have been my brother Luis, she'd be nursing the baby at the meetings, which back then was pretty unconventional, but she wasn't going to miss the meeting because she was a mother. And she told me a story of when they had a forum way back in the early days, and DA Jim Garrison, who was a very tall, imposing man, kind of a bully, she was running the forum, and she had a baby dish made of metal, a baby spoon, and a kitchen timer. And when the timer went off and she knocked the spoon, that was when it was time to stop speaking. And she said, DA Garrison, I mean, stop speaking. I mean, you can finish your sentence, that's it. He said, okay, Miss Mary, but it's going to be a long sentence, So just having to deal with these guys, but she was good at dealing with these guys. And I remember one funny crossover where, of course, our mother couldn't drive. She took the streetcar to work, etc. And Moon's house wasn't that far from ours. So sometimes she could jump in the limo with him and get dropped off at our house. And once my brothers and I, we had gotten some fireworks, and we're out there in front of the house shooting off fireworks. And around the corner comes the mayor's limo. And we're out there shooting fireworks, and we tried to hide them, but it was too late. And our mom was pretty embarrassed, and we were pretty humiliated. And the door opens, and Mom steps out, and Moon looks over and goes, boys, it's against the law. Yes, sir. That'd be the mayor's law. Yes, sir. So it was a funny environment to grow up. It was like a family environment at City Hall with both Sydney and Moon. Everybody there loved the kids. Once in the paper at the Constitutional Convention, I remember there's an article, right, Luis, where it said, not much happened at the convention today. And it was a picture of my brother Luis as a little boy asleep on some chairs. And that was the photograph in the paper. Yeah, but we were like the little mascots running around there, it was quieter back then in the Capitol, and those guys kind of looked after us. The city hall people, Hing Lam was there for the city. We were taken care of. It was a great, fascinating way to grow up, and to see people admiring your mother so in her work. It just makes you so. It made us so proud. It's almost hard to describe how proud it made us all of her. You know. Then post-Landrieu administration, she ran for the State Board of Elementary Secondary Education, the only thing she ever ran for. And she lost. And that was where I think she came up with the saying, it's okay that I lost, because if you win, you're supposed to serve, right? And then I got to go to Baton Rouge and all that. So forget it. Our stepfather Blake had us as little kids canvassing the doors. We were active in the campaign. It was a lot of fun. She went off to law school at that point. She finished her degrees, got her law degree. Then Buddy Roemer, when he won for governor, kind of all of a sudden, he needed someone who was good at tax reform, and he asked our mom to be chair of the tax commission. And there she was, overseeing all the assessors now. But she was built for that. It was not a problem for her. And so when Katrina hit, then it was funny, because all of a sudden my mother and my world merged. Because Elizabeth and I had been so active in the public schools. All 6 of our kids went there. We're all graduates in the public schools, and I was a teacher. It's where we were, what we did. So then our mother got much more involved in Sci High. She was the founding board president of Sci High, and then my mom and I were there together doing that work, and that was so wonderful for me. It was so prideful for me. Because she brought that experience, she brought those connections, she brought all that wherewithal. I could tell her about education, how it needs to work, how the laws work, what we're up against. She could talk about how we're going to get it done with the legislature and so forth. It was a great teamwork. And at that point, maybe there were some people who knew her as Carlos's mom, but a lot of people, I'd come in and they might be dismissive. Oh, that's Mary's son, the great Mary Zervigon, that's Mary's son. And she and I kind of bonded over that, because when she come in the room sometimes, oh, that's Rosa Keller's daughter, or for our grandmother, oh, that's A.B. Freeman's daughter, So we love that. We bonded over that. I'd love to come in and tell her, oh, Mom, it happened again. We love that. But then it's just as likely someone would say, oh, you're Mary Zervigon's son. I'd say, indeed, I am. Say, glad you're here. Now we know stuff's going to get done, because that was her reputation. And so now we find it's kind of the end of an era. It's a very interesting time with Moon and Mom going about in the same week. And we still have some of our elders with us, some we do not. About 10 years ago, we went to the 40th anniversary of the Constitutional Convention at LSU. They did a symposium, and they had about 8 leaders there. My mom was one of them. Since then, Johnny Jackson has passed, Buddy Roemer has passed, Edwin Edwards has passed, who are participating now Moon, but not everyone has. We still have some of our elders who showed us the way, and we certainly try to go forward in their footsteps. It's hard shoes to fill. Some of those old warriors are here with us today, and we thank you for being here. It just I will try to emulate her tenacity. We will all try to do our part. Fellow school board member Nolan Marshall and I were reminiscing about her and Madeline Schenk pushing for that building. I think that means you had to get your capital outlay funds. You had to keep those capital outlay funds for like a decade. You had to work with the council, legislature, the board. It was very complicated work. And Madeline Schenk and my mom weren't going to be deterred. And board member Nolan Marshall said at one point, I was thinking, one of these ladies is going to give me a break. I said, Nolan, that was them giving you a break. It can get more intense than that. And for me personally, I've lost my mother, my mentor, my #1 political advisor. Mario, you might get more phone calls. And it's just all we can do to emulate our elders and serve in the same way with integrity, with determination on a mission to do the right thing. And that's all you really care about. And so with that, the city council was gracious enough to put together a proclamation for our mother. And Council President Helena Moreno, I'd like it if you could come up and make that presentation, if you could. Want to come on up here?
Thank you, Carlos. Well, first, I'll just say that I'm really honored to be here to celebrate Mary's life. She was a mentor. She was a dear friend. She was a member of a really fun group we had called the Constitution Club. And I know that some of the members are here today. And, you know, Carlos, as I told you before, and you talked about this a little bit, it's like she was small, but she was mighty. And oh my goodness, I also served with her in the Board of Liquidation where she served as chair. And I'll just tell a very quick story, okay? So it was my very first meeting for the Board of Liquidation. And it was also the CAO's very first meeting for the Board of Liquidation, and Mary serving as chair. And there was a little bit of discussion because the CAO did not want to roll the millages back when Mary had pretty much asserted that legally we needed to do so. So he started his argument, and I asked some questions, and others asked some questions as well. And Poco Sloth had some questions. And then once everyone ended with their questions, Mary weighed in. And let me just say that we rolled back the millages. So I think that's just so fitting for the type of person who Mary was. So on behalf of the City Council, we wanted to offer a proclamation celebrating her life and of course, mentioning all of her accomplishments, but more than anything, to remember the person who she was. So on behalf of the New Orleans City Council, signed by all 7 members, be it proclaimed by the City of New Orleans that the council honors Mary Keller Zervigon's lifelong commitment to the betterment of the City of New Orleans through her philanthropy and public service.
Thank you. And unlike a lot of people, she loved City Hall. She loved City Hall. She loved doing the work. And so then, you know, I guess for my mother, it was, it began as sort of that young Troy Carter, that young Troy Carter, that hard worker, that staff member, now our congressman. And so Congressman, I know you've got something from the Congress that you'd like to present. I'd like you to come up and do that for us now, please.
Good evening, everyone. Tough day. Tough day. 2 icons gone to glory on the same day. Going for a homecoming, one that makes us sad, but one that makes us proud and glad. Because what a blessing it was to have Mary in our lives. I will tell you, as a very young staffer, right out of undergraduate school, working for then Sidney Bartholomew, I had the opportunity to share an office, literally, with Mary Z. And right out of school, all my friends had decided they were going to go off to law school or graduate school or professional school. And I had fellowships and scholarships to do the same, but I got an opportunity to work for the mayor of New Orleans. I had an undergraduate degree in political science, had aspirations of leadership and helping and doing great things in the world. I took a job for $14,500 a year. It was 1986. And I was telling Mary about that. I said, you know, I passed up a lot of money and opportunity and fellowships and scholarships for this opportunity, and I'm so excited. And she was with her glasses and her knitting. She said, I make $1 a year. And she literally did. She had $1 a year contract with the mayor because her service, there was no price tag. Her commitment to people, there was no price tag. Her love for this community and her philanthropic efforts were in her DNA. It's a part of who she was. And the no nonsense that my dear friends speak of was so real. And I got to tell you, at first I thought, heck, she was rude. Until I realized, no, she wasn't. She was just telling the truth. It was unbridled. There was no filter, but it was never with ill intent. It was always just a cut to the bottom line. You know, over her tilted glasses, over her knitting. She was always paying attention, even when you thought she wasn't. And it was disarming, but effective nonetheless, because we were in those heated meetings when we served as legislative coordinators for the city. And during that time, it's not quite as bad now, but during that time, you couldn't even say New Orleans. You had to say a population over 450,000. That's how the legislation had to be written, because otherwise it had such an anti-New Orleans sentiment. But Mary was able to weave through that with facts. Whether it was on fighting against gypsum, or fighting for a fair tax reform, or making sure that people were heard. She was small in stature, but powerful in intellect and effectiveness. I count her among my dearest mentors and friends. She was a ferocious reader. And I'm almost certain that I've got at least 3 books on my library that I was supposed to return to her. We would share books and she would say, you should read this one. No, read this one. This is, you should read this. And I would, like a good student, I would read it. And I'd come back and I'd tell her, that was a great book. And she said, where is it? Sometimes I gave it back, other times I didn't. But the memories that I have of Mary Z are very fond, and I will always hold in a very special place in my heart. I, like my dear colleague, President Helena Moreno, have a proclamation here from the United States Congress. I know Mary would be looking at this saying, please don't read all that. So I won't. But I will tell you the beauty of it is it highlights and spells out the great efforts, the great contribution, and the love that she had for our community and for humanity. So this congressional record, which spells out all of the things that I've said and many of the things that's been said by speakers before, the beauty of this congressional insert is that this will live in the Library of Congress forever. This document, this record of her accomplishments and contributions will forevermore live in the United States Congress records.
Our mother was extremely, truly humble. All her humility, she would genuinely be confused as to what all the fuss is about. For real, what was her nature. So with that, that concludes as best I could sum up her career quickly. Sandra, thank you all for coming.
And now we'll hear from a grandchild's perspective from Phoebe.
My daughter's tablet. Sorry, guys. I didn't think to print or write anything out. Okay, so I'm following up the politician. So I'm going to do my best to give a good speech, but I'm just going to read a little something I wrote about what it was like to have Mary as my grandma. I'm obviously very emotional because we were all her grandchildren, we were so close to her. And as a lot of you guys know, my siblings and I, we grew up with a shared yard with my grandma, and she always kept her doors that were to our yard unlocked, and we could come whenever we wanted, stay as long as we wanted. There was no expectations. She'd let us play with all of the toys and let us eat her food. We had to clean up, but we'd do that and then we would leave. And as a mom now, I think about some of the things that she put up with from us and what a patient person she was. And I think my biggest example is when she got a photocopier, like one that you have at an office. And myself and my brothers and my cousins decided that it was like the coolest thing ever. So we would bring everything to my grandma's house to photocopy. And like we were small children, so obviously things got crazy. But she let us do that, and she didn't hover, and she let us be crazy kids, and then said, good to see you, all right, bye. And also, while we're talking about her patience, and I remember being in high school, and we used to go over to dinner at her house every week. And one week I just randomly invited 3 of my friends, just showed up there with like 3 people, and we were already a family of 8. And she was just like, oh, okay, that's great. Like, let's push the table out. We have more food. Like, I'm happy to get to know your friends. And now I would be like, oh my God, if someone did that. So that's just the kind of person that she was. And now I have that perspective. And my grandma was like more like a third parent to me, growing up so close, like in proximity and just emotionally to her. And she was always the person that like I knew that I could go to for judgment-free advice and support, like no matter what it was, no matter how like silly it might have seemed to anyone else, like she would always listen to me and help me through everything, like in any capacity, in whatever I needed. And it's hard now knowing that like that she's not here anymore. And that had me thinking about one time when I was 8 years old, and some of my friends at school decided that they were going to talk exclusively in Pig Latin, but they weren't going to teach me because kids can be, kids. And so I went to my grandma and I was crying and I was like, oh my gosh, grandma, like all my friends are speaking in Pig Latin. I don't know Pig Latin. And she was like, well, that's ridiculous. Like, let me teach you Pig Latin. And she practiced with me. And she sat down until I felt comfortable enough to go to school the next day and confront my friends in Pig Latin. And she took it seriously. Like I felt heard and seen. And I think like as one of 6, that was such a special thing for us to have, that one-on-one type of place that we could go to. And it wasn't just in my childhood. She was like that for her entire life for me. And I have a daughter who's almost 2. And I remember when I was just like a couple months postpartum, I had scheduled a visit with her, and my daughter was like very fussy and she fell asleep at my mom and dad's house. And I went over there. I was like, oh, grandma, I'm sorry. Like, Ophelia fell asleep. It's just me. And she told me, I love your daughter, but I wanted to see you. Like, I wanted to sit down with you and talk to you and see how you are. And I just don't think that's something that like new moms hear often. And it really touched me. And that's just how she was. Like, she really cared about us. Let me see where I'm at. Sorry, guys. So one thing that I've noticed since she's died is just like how much of an influence she was on me, and how much I hear her voice in my head every day when I'm making decisions and just thinking about life. And so I'm really lucky that I had that guidance growing up. And I know like losing a grandparent is something that pretty much, like if you're lucky, you live that life and you experience that. But I just didn't, I don't know, with my grandma, it felt different. And I remember telling her that, because she would always be like, oh, well, when I die, whatever. I'd be like, no, grandma, please don't talk about that. And she'd be like, Phoebe, you have to deal with it. Like one day I'm going to croak. Like, you've got to be ready. You got to be ready. And like, no matter how much she tried to prepare me, like I definitely wasn't ready. And I know that even though she had that tough exterior, and like everyone talked about, and I'm sure like all of you know, I know that if I went to her today and she was still here, like she would hug me on the couch and she would cry with me and she would be there for me. So I'm going to miss her a lot, and I already miss her a lot. But I'm so lucky that I had her and that we all had her in our life. So I'm going to keep our memories and all of those good, wonderful things, because that's pretty much all there is when I think about my grandma. I keep all of that with me. So I'm happy that I could share that with you guys.
Now a poem from Elizabeth, mom's daughter-in-law.
As I think everyone has pointed out here today, Mary loved words. She loved to read, she loved to write, and she loved to speak. So I have an offering, a poem, The Wild Iris by Louise Gluck. At the end of my suffering, there was a door. Hear me out. That which you call death, I remember. Overhead, noises, branches of the pine shifting, then nothing. The weak sun flickered over the dry surface. It is terrible to survive as consciousness buried in the dark earth. Then it was over. That which you fear, being a soul and unable to speak, ending abruptly, the stiff earth bending a little, and what I took to be birds darting in low shrubs. You who do not remember passage from the other world, I tell you, I could speak again. Whatever returns from oblivion returns to find a voice. From the center of my life came a great fountain, deep blue, shadows on azure seawater. And as Phoebe said, I think we can all hear Mary if we listen.
And now another grandkids reflection, Ben Zervigon and his husband, JT Hustle, with a few musical selections.
Hey everyone, it's so great to see everybody here and all these different people from her life and all the different intersections of her life. My grandma was a very realistic and earthly person. She was very concerned with the actuality of everything, but in her own way, she also had a really fine appreciation of art. And just like every other opinion she had very strong opinions about art. And she would always say that when she was a girl, she went to church because she liked the music and no other reason. and she liked the music of the church particularly, and consciously she took a music theory class or music appreciation class her senior year, and she just realized that it was something she could never pursue in her life for whatever reason, but she loved listening. She listened very deeply. And one time I was giving a concert when I was maybe like 12 or 13, and I played a little Bach and some Satie, and she was like falling asleep in the front row for like the whole second half of the concert. And I was like, "Oh, grandma, like, what'd you think?" And she was like, "Oh, I just really hate this spacey French stuff." And I was just like, yeah. And so she was never wrong, because I mean, like on a program with Bach and then Satie, that is definitely not, not comparable. And so it was always great hearing her opinions on all that stuff. And so my husband JT is going to play 3 short pieces for us today. The first one is Egon Petrie's transcription of the Bach hymn, "Sheep May Safely Graze." The second's a small piece of mine called "A Place Outside of Air." And then the third is Schubert's last song, Die Taubenpost, in transcription. And I just wanted to close off my statements by reading the hymn of "Sheep May Safely Graze," because I think it's definitely might remind a lot of us of my grandma's life and legacy. So sheep may safely graze in pasture in a watchful shepherd's sight. Those who rule with wisdom guiding bring to hearts a peace abiding. Bless a land with joy made bright. So I hope you enjoy the music.
So thank you, everybody, for being here to remember. And we have, sorry, it's kind of hard. We can stay, we can be downstairs for more time. There's coffee, there are pastries, as you saw, and so we can visit more. But it's really great to see everybody and to be able to share in these memories of Mom. So thank you again for being here. And we'll see you around town, downstairs, someplace else. Thank you.